Association of Chiefs of Police and Arrive Alive Drive Sober.
You're watching Rogers TV.
Welcome to this week's episode of Food Bites. Mike Savage and I were members of Parliament together in Ottawa for a number of years. Mike, longer than I was, but we concluded our time there in 2011. I came back at that point to London and continued to work on the food bank. But Mike went on to become the mayor of Halifax the next year, and he's had 3 highly successful terms while he was there. He was also the chair of the Big City Mayor's Caucus here in Canada. Is just an awesome fellow. He's a great friend. We traveled together. Mike, this picture that you see here, Jane loves this picture of you because she thinks you look like a hockey coach, which is awesome. But Mike then just announced last week that he would no longer be running for the next term, which would have been his 4th term. He said the time is up, time for somebody new. And I read that with sadness because we love Mike a lot, and we know how much he's contributed to the Canadian municipal scene. We'll talk to Mike a bit about what he's going to do next. But you know, Mike, it's just been awesome to be able to see you and talk to you. I appreciate you joining us, and Jane sends her greetings as well. So.
Well, look, it's always good to see you, Glen, and I keep up on you and know the amazing work that you and Jane continue to do. And my thoughts are with you and Jane. I know there's a difficult time in the family, and sending our love and best wishes. But it's great to be on the air with you again.
Yeah. Yes, Jane lost her sister this week. But if I had to do any interview of Food Bites right now, I'd want to do it with you. You were such an encouragement to me in politics. You know, when I came in, it was 2006 in a by-election, and I came to Ottawa, and I was trying to figure my way around. We've talked about this before. You were such a help during that particular time. And then I know we traveled together, but you were in the Paul Martin government, I remember. So you had this experience. And was your dad the premier of the province in Nova Scotia? Yes.
Yeah. So my father, interestingly, he wasn't really a politician, though, Glenn. He was a little bit like you in that he was an activist who was very involved in making progressive change in his community. He was a doctor, and became the mayor of Dartmouth in 1985. And then when there was an opening for the Liberal leadership in 1992, his name kind of shot up, and he became leader of the Liberal Party in 92, premier in 93. Difficult times, made a lot of decisions that people at the time didn't like, but he did something that I've always paid attention to, which is that he kept his reputation as an honest person who tried to do the right things, and that transcends the gives and takes of politics, I think.
Yeah, and in your case, it has as well. You were highly respected in Ottawa, and I've seen you carry it forward into the mayor's position. Mike, how do you find, I'm a big picture kind of thinker, so therefore I liked Ottawa from that aspect of it. I didn't like the partisan side of it as much.
I remember.
Yes,
I remember.
I know you remember. But I think, there's quite a difference between being a member of Parliament in a party, following a leader, and then suddenly you become the leader yourself of a city like Halifax. And we all know the fantastic things that have happened in Halifax despite all the troubles. But how have you found that? Have you found that you liked that better than you did your federal experience?
Very much so. In some ways, being a mayor is more like an executive role in the private sector. I used to run an oil company for the Irvings here. In some ways, being mayor is a little bit more like that than being a cog in the machine in Ottawa. It was tough. I really liked being a member of Parliament, but you and I were there at times when, as members of Parliament, it was hard to carve out a significant role and to always vote the way that we wanted and do the things that we wanted to do, because we were expected to fit into the parliamentary roles that we had. Sure. And as mayor, it's been very liberating. And I can do things that I would never have done as part of a team because of how it might have affected people in the caucus. And so I've really enjoyed being mayor. I still love the job. I just don't think people should do these jobs forever.
Yeah. And I understand that. And you also were there at a time when, there was pandemic and other things. I think there was also, even prior to the pandemic, I know the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and others, they were really driving for change in things like climate change, for instance, but also the productivity of cities. We've talked a lot about that on this program with other guests as well. But, in Confederation, roughly 90% of the country lived in rural settings and only 10% were in civic settings. Now that's totally reversed. But what hasn't changed, at least it seems to me, and you're smarter than I am, so you can correct me, but it seems to me that federalism itself has not adapted to that change. So that federalism, this division of powers between the feds and the provinces, regions, in cities, it seems to me was, heavily geared towards the senior jurisdictions. And then cities were kind of the runt of the litter, so to speak, who would, could only have certain options for raising funds to take on projects, and therefore were required real help from the senior jurisdictions. And you and I saw that from both sides. Federalism, it seems to me, has not changed and adapted to the reality that not only are the greatest needs now in cities, but the greatest potential is also within cities. Do you have a view of that?
Yeah, I've got a very strong view on that. Premised on the fact that property tax is a shitty way to collect taxes. It's not fair, it's not progressive, doesn't really even reflect wealth or ability to pay. And it's survived all these years, but it's not surviving the incredible growth of the country, which is spurred by growth in cities like my own, which has been one of the fastest growing cities in Canada. But a lot of our cities have been growing. And, I asked a question of our CAO a couple of months ago. I said, when is all this growth of the city going to pay a dividend in terms of revenue? And the sad answer is it may never do that, because the cost of infrastructure to manage the growth that we have is higher right now than the revenue that we're going to get from property tax. So when somebody moves to Halifax, as an example, they start paying sales tax right away. They pay income tax to the provincial and federal governments. And so the revenue is going up to provincial and federal governments, but it's not going up to municipal governments in the same way. And I am 100% supportive of growth. I'm 100% supportive of immigration. It has helped to change the face of our city for the better, but it comes at a cost. And as an example, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities did a study that indicated that the average housing unit that's going to be built in Canada, the average housing unit, whether it's an apartment, a condo, or a house, requires $107,000 of municipal infrastructure: water, transit, green space. That's a lot more than cities are able to pay. I'm sure it's the same in London. I'm sure, I've had these discussions with Mayor Morgan at the big city mayor's table. It's a real challenge, and I think we have to rethink how because we all want growth, but we all have to share in the cost of that growth.
Right. So how is that done, though, Mike, from the standpoint that if we were going to make those changes, does that come as a result of some kind of political arrangement that senior jurisdictions start understanding this and become more responsive to that? Or is it kind of a constitutional change that needs to happen around powers? So if it is going to be changing federalism or something like that, often if you leave it to politics, it's varying. It goes back and forth, right? Do you see it under a constitutional change that would happen? Or how do you see making those changes take place?
Well, as everybody knows, constitutional change is a long, long process in this country. It requires a lot of things to go right. Yeah. So I think that's not a solution in the short or the midterm. I do think, in the same way that when I first got elected, and around the time that you were elected, the federal government, Paul Martin in particular, had what he called the New Deal for cities. And they came up with what they called the gas tax, where a percentage of the gas tax, it was never really a percentage of the gas tax, but that's what it was called initially. It bears no resemblance to that now, and in fact, the name has been changed to the Canada Community Building Fund. But it did dedicate some growth. And what I think we need in the country is we need to sit down. the three orders of government, and I think probably we should have First Nations involvement as well from a governance point of view. But we need to sit down and say, where's the money coming in and where's the money going out, and what are the needs? It's a challenging thing. I don't blame the provincial or federal government, and the feds have been a great partner to us on infrastructure over the last number of years, and to some extent provinces have as well. Nobody's breaking the law here. It's just that when you look at it, for example, Halifax is responsible for somewhere between 80 and 82% of the growth of the province of Nova Scotia. But we're not seeing anywhere near that in terms of revenue. And, we need, if we're going to bring people in, especially now that we have a well-known housing crisis, both on the homelessness front, but even just in terms of housing supply, all orders of government want more supply. You've certainly seen that in Ontario with some of the actions of the Ford government and the Housing Accelerator Fund that Sean Fraser and the feds have been advocating, and we were one of the first cities to sign on to that, and I think London was as well. We agree with these things. We want more housing for more people, but we have an opportunity to dramatically change the housing reality in Canada. And if all we do is build units to store people as opposed to communities where people can live, we've missed this opportunity. And it's going to require all orders of government and NGOs and the private sector to come together and say, how do we fund it in a way that's sustainable? Because it's not sustainable for municipalities right now.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and yet I wonder. We know Paul Martin well, as you know, as you do. But I remember when he did the gas tax, it so upset provinces, right? Because they saw that he was developing a relationship between a federal government and municipalities, which they themselves, as provinces, wanted to control. Right. Mm-hmm. So we talked about that many times with Paul, but he used it as a toe in the water, or kind of a Omaha Beach kind of thing, where he was making an open kind of, invitation to looking at a new kind of way of how to spread resources throughout the community. Recently, for instance, in Ontario, we've hardly had an increase in the Ontario disability benefit for over a decade. That's also true for Ontario Works. Now, for disability, there's been a marginal increase, but not very much. It's inconsequential. So the feds responded to that and tried to give a disability benefit, which then our province claws back. That doesn't just happen here in Ontario, but and I'm trying to just highlight this problem of, if we were going to have what you're calling for, this new kind of arrangement, it seems to me that it requires the kind of political will that I'm not sure that I see in Canada. I think in an earlier time, when you're trying to build St. Lawrence seaways and railroads and ports and airports and all that kind of stuff, big, huge public infrastructure ventures, health systems, universities, those things where a lot of money needs to be shared all the way around, and public money as well. There's acknowledgement, we all need to work together on that. But it seems to me in recent years, these jurisdictions, the ones that we're talking about, don't seem to want to fully play ball. I'm just saying it from my point of view. They don't seem to want to play ball in a way in which, by cooperating together, more resources come to cities. Do you think I'm wrong?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. There are some indications that provincial governments recognize the challenge of cities. In Ontario, the provincial government has taken over responsibility for the DVP and the Lakeshore, the Expressway, big pieces of infrastructure that are under the municipal guideline, but which the city simply can't afford to manage. We've seen the feds come in with money for the refugee support in Toronto, asylum claimants. And, there's a number of cities, Brampton, and I'm sure others, where the percentage of people who are housing stressed has gone up dramatically as a result of people come to this country and not having a place to live. So it's a challenge. Yes, provincial governments jealously guard their jurisdiction, as most would.
Yeah.
One of the really worthwhile projects I've seen from the feds was the Rapid Housing Initiative, where they provided money directly to municipalities to go out and get housing started, and it had to be done quickly.
Yeah.
In our case, we don't have responsibility for housing. The province does, but we took part in that and we worked with the provincial government. But there's no question provincial governments are uneasy when they see direct money going from the feds to the province, even though in a lot of cases, my own province, equalization payments have skyrocketed directly from federal to provincial governments. So, look, there's a lot of things I could say, but at the end of the day, the politics that I believe in is a politics that says you have to get reasonable people to do reasonable things. Now, I know that's not the way everything happens today, but we have to sit down and say, what are the things we agree on? We want more immigrants. We're going to need a place for people to live. If that's the case, how are we going to fund it? And we have to figure that out. On climate change, Halifax has a really good climate action plan. We're very proud of our climate action plan. And we have a direct tax on property specifically for climate action. It's not, not everybody loves it, but it's the right thing. But it'll only raise a fraction of what we need if we're going to really electrify the buses, if we're going to do deep energy retrofits, if we're going to use nature-based solutions. We have to sit down with the other orders of governments, all of these things. The bottom line for us is we need a new municipal growth framework which ties our growth to revenue somehow. And we're going to have to do it with the other orders of government in a sensible, rational way. And I'm under no illusions that it's going to happen tomorrow or that we're going to be welcomed with open arms. But I think we can make a very good case. And I really appreciate the leadership of FCM and the work that they've been doing on this to sort of make the case that infrastructure has to be a shared responsibility.
So what does it take to bring that about then? You say constitutional stuff. It's an interesting thing to look at, but it takes too long. Is it really a new kind of political leadership, the kind that you provide, for instance? Because Halifax, I know you've told me before, because you were on the show a couple of times last year, you talked about how you work, is it with the Bloomberg Foundation in New York? And then you talk about working with seaboard cities along the eastern part of Canada. So Halifax has this lens that is actually much beyond it. Which is fascinating. But does it take a new kind of political leadership at all levels to do that? Or does it take more pressure from things like business communities and others that are interested in productivity and other things? Or does it take all of those? How does that come about?
Well, I think it takes all of those things. We need our chamber. Our Chamber of Commerce has been supportive of some of our initiatives in terms of revenue sharing. But yeah, it takes all those things. I mean, I'm not convinced that the world is going towards a place where there's more reason and compromise in politics. We seem to be going to a place where there's less.
Yeah.
Not just here, perhaps not primarily here, but the U.S., the U.K., all over Europe. There's a lot of governments being elected that are not progressive at all. In fact, are proudly isolationist or anti-immigrant. So I've always had this view, and you and I would have chatted about this, maybe even on a bus ride in the Middle East sometime, that I think Canada has the opportunity to do things right in a cooperative way. We live in a federated model where people of common sense can come together. We just lost Mr. Mulroney, but Mr. Mulroney, who I disagreed with on almost every single issue, did espouse a politics of reasonable moderation. Yeah. When John Turner passed, nobody was more complimentary of John Turner than Brian Mulroney. Yeah. That kind of, chivalry, it's hard to imagine today, but we have to fight for it. Mm-hmm. And I think the revenue piece is, I always tell people, and my office will tell you, there's a few things that the mayor will always say. Number one is don't let perfect be the enemy of better. Number two is it's amazing what you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit. Neither of those two things naturally align themselves with the political landscape, but I think we have to fight for them. I think we can make a case, and we have to continue to make the case. And in my inarticulate way, what I'm saying is, yes, I think what you said is correct. We need all those people. We need all orders of government. We need NGOs. We need chambers of commerce. We need the private sector. We need the united way. We need everybody to come together and say, this is in everybody's best interest, and we have to find a way to do it.
Yeah, and just as a sidebar to that, you and Jane and I did have those discussions on a bus in the Middle East, and I remember them, how important they were, because we were with other MPs as well from other parties, trying to forge some kind of relationship even on that bus. It was an interesting challenge, as you remember.
It was. But Glenn, you this was inherent in the way that you did the politics when you were in the federal scene, was that you know, I would watch you. You would be, most people would just hang around their own folks, but after question period, another time I'd say, what are you doing today? And you were going to meet with, I don't know, Minister Oda about something at CEDA or whatever it was. And that's not normal. I always tell people one of the things I like about municipal politics is when I was in federal politics and a piece of legislation was coming to the floor of the House, all of our caucuses would get together and decide our position going into debate.
Yeah, that's
when
true.
we should be deciding our position coming out of debate. But the political system doesn't really allow for that.
No.
But municipally, I see a lot of hope. I see a lot of hope at the municipal level. I've changed my mind on things because I've listened to my fellow councillors make a case. We should do that more often. We should change our minds. We shouldn't be so worried about being called flip-floppers and actually be thought of as people that listen to reasoned debate and take it into account.
Yeah. Can we detour just a bit and talk a bit about homelessness? Because we did talk about that the last time there, last year. And I mean, it's such a major issue across the country. You felt back then that was maybe the number one issue that the municipalities were discussing with one another, especially at the big mayor's conference. Because it grew so fast and it seemed to almost get to a point of being out of control. London has done this health and homelessness initiative, which is really, you know, it's kind of caught the eye of the country because of bringing all of these partners together that you know, you've been talking about. But still there's the sense that the whole homeless thing, even though we've now been with it for some time, is not necessarily finding the solutions that needs to happen. I realize that's all at different levels, but is it your sense, Mike, in the position that you're in, is it your sense that there's some real progress being made cities, or is it more hit and miss in different parts of the country?
I think that there's some progress being made. I see it here in Nova Scotia. The provincial government was not all that helpful initially when we started having encampments, but in the last few months, under a couple of different ministers, they've been very helpful. I'm very pleased with the progress. One of the things you learn in this job is that it's easy for the urgent to take away from the important. And until things become a crisis, governments don't mobilize as the way they should. We're in a province that didn't have any investment in public housing for 3 decades, in a country that didn't have a national housing strategy from the early 1990s until 2018 or 19. And we've become so used to dealing with crises. So COVID was a perfect example. We had a health crisis, which led to an economic crisis, in the midst of which we had a social justice crisis embodied by Black Lives Matter. And then overlaying that, we have, the climate crisis. Yeah. And right now we do have an issue of crisis. There's probably a crisis in terms of housing supply, but I do think there is absolutely a crisis in homelessness. And, we have, people who are our fellow citizens, literally our sisters and brothers that have no place to live. And so they're living in tents in the middle of cities, and not just big cities. All cities and all communities have this issue. And it's not a one-size-fits-all, obviously. I'm very hopeful. I've had great discussions with Sean Fraser about homelessness, and I know that he's been pushing for some new homeless initiatives, more funding for homelessness and encampments. You have the National Advocate for Homelessness and Encampments. There is action around it that I think, has been helpful, and I think other provinces are seeing it as well, that it's in nobody's interest to have our fellow residents living in tents or living outside. So it just makes you wonder, though, like, what's the next big crisis in the country? I don't know what the next, if I knew that, but anyway, I guess that's for the next mayor to figure out, whoever she or he is. We react as politicians far too often to crisis when it costs more and it's more acute. And I think we have to do a better job of figuring out what's coming down the pike, right?
You were the eternal optimist in Ottawa. I remember some of the talks we used to have, and I just used to get so frustrated with things. And you thought things would work out. And do you feel that now? Like I feel a lot of hope around cities. I do. because that's where all the people are. So I tend to find that hope will come from wherever those people are going to be. They're gifted, they're talented, they've got resources in many cases. So I tend to feel a lot of that. But when you deal with a kind of structure within a country that does not tend, it would be like, not taking anything from cities or from universities or anything else, right? You just exist. But to me, in a country, when you've got cities with all of this kind of talent and innovation and all of these kind of things, and not just problems, that's really where you're going to go to for the future. It's where the puck is going to be. Globally, we understand that. But for some reason, we just seem to be slow in the uptake in that in Canada. I sense if I were to ask you, do you feel hope about that? You're going to say yes. Is that true?
I think generally it is, Glenn. I think generally, I'm a politics watcher. The thought of another term of President Trump is abhorrent to me. The thought of some of the populist governments that are getting elected based on picking and choosing who are the good people to be in their country worries me. Yeah. But I do get my hope from cities, and if I'm having a tough day, and every now and then I can pick up a phone and I can call Charlie Clark in Saskatoon, or I could call John Tory, when he was the mayor of Toronto, Olivia, Josh Morgan, and there's a number of mayors, Sandra Masters and Amarjeet Sohi, and the reason I say that is I think mayors actually focus on problems and not politics. Even mayors I've met around the world who may be liberal or conservative or social democratic or Tory or Labour, even mayors who get elected don't have the benefit of hiding behind politics. They have to solve the problems in their communities. And it's not that many years ago, mayors didn't talk about the environment. Mayors didn't talk about human rights, about immigration. We talked about just, the basic things we did, keeping the streets clear of snow and cutting the grass and that sort of stuff. And when I was looking at running for mayor that many years ago now, I said, you know what, there's so many things that we could do as a city that the city hasn't undertaken. We can be more optimistic, and we can actually bring people along on big issues in a way that some other orders of government would have a hard time doing, which isn't, I fully understand the party system. I was in it. I support it. Yeah. There has to be some spine of policy and practice that pulls people together. You get elected as a liberal or a conservative, a New Democrat or a Green or a Bloc, then you have some responsibility to that party. But when you get elected on your own, you can actually go where the problems are, and you can try to fix them and bring people together, because the mayor does have something important, which is the power to convene and to bring people together around what the problems are and to find solutions. So that's where my optimism lies. Yeah.
You're so eloquent around those things, Mike. It's why Jane, I've always taken to you that way, the way you define problems, but also how you seek working through them. I've got a big favor to ask you. I know I asked you a big favor about 8 years ago to come to London and address us at a meeting at the Convention Centre, and you did, and you were awesome. And so I'm not going to ask you to do that again, but could we do another one of these shows at some point in the next month or two, Mike? I do think in all the time that we've done these shows, and it's usually around food, and I get that, but these addressing of the bigger picture issues, if we don't do that more, then we're not going to get where we want to get. It doesn't matter what the sector is, whether it's small business or the environment or food security or whatever. I would like to talk to you more about it and get more of your ideas, because I'm not in the place that you are. I don't have the reach or the breadth that you do mentally because of your experience in those areas. I think we could use your help. And before you're finally finished your third term in office there in Halifax, I wouldn't mind getting some more of your wisdom out of that. Would you be open to that?
You call, I'll answer.
No, that's good, Mike. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing today. Do you have plans for where you go next?
No, I don't know if I'll stay in. I'm not going to be. I don't see myself running for office anymore. Yeah. But maybe there's something in public life, more likely something in private life. I just feel like it's the right time, and the city will benefit, and I'll benefit from doing something else.
Thanks for all that service, Mike.